Hello, this is Robert Ewell, and this is the 12th talk on my series on being a good steward of God's world, as we were directed to by Genesis 1:26. Today, I'm going to be talking about not overspecifying. Overspecifying makes things more expensive, and that's using more resources to get the desired job accomplished. And so it's another form of waste is caused by overspecifying. But before we do that, I did promise that I would talk to you about a real world example of how we could change behaviors and save energy cost. And at the same time, as you save cost, that implies that there's a resource that's not being consumed. In this particular example, I had just started working in this area and I was looking at the energy consumption at the major factory in the company. I was trying to see how we used energy and see if there was something about the way we use energy that was an opportunity for savings. So I was just doing basic, what does the data say? So to do that, I pulled what is called the 15-minute interval data off of all of the meters in the site. And we had quite a few of them. So that means every 15 minutes it records how much power we're being used. And so you can graph it, you can plot it, you can do those sort of things. 15-minute intervals, 24 hours a day for a year is 35,000 lines of information. And they look like the little picture there on the right. So there's a date timestamp and then each unit. How much power was it pulling at that moment? I sorted it, I grouped it, I graphed it, I color coded it. I worked on this for over a month, not continuously, but I'd come and look at it again. Wasn't seeing much. And then one day I saw something. The maximum power didn't happen at the same time every day, nor did it happen at the same day of the week. Sometimes it could even happen on a weekend. We would use the most power for the week then. That was all I observed. What did it mean? Energy consumption in the factory was a choice. Someone was deciding what to turn on and off and when to run equipment. Actually, there were many people doing that. And if I could get them to not run the equipment, to do their turn down times in the afternoons during the week, that's when energy is the most expensive because that's when the most energy is being used. Energy at night is cheaper because there's fewer people using it. The same thing with energy on the weekends. And so there's a price signal trying to encourage us to be good stewards of our energy consumption. All right, well, that's a behavior change. How could I do that? Well, I met with the head of production. He was actually on my energy team, so that was easy to do. And asked him, why do you schedule your shutdowns for the process equipment at night and on weekends? And he says, well, that's what we always do. Could you do that during the afternoons during the week? He says, I guess we could. It really doesn't matter to us when we do it. And I explained to him that, the energy is more expensive then. Why don't we turn stuff off during the afternoons when the energy is the most expensive and we can save some money? He thought that was a good idea. We have to shut these production lines down anyways to clean them and get them set up for the next run. And so the time of day or week is really very schedulable. And so the next morning at his morning production meeting, he told his schedulers, from now on, I want you to schedule all the turnarounds on the equipment to happen in the afternoon. He came in the next day and they had scheduled something not in the middle of the afternoon. And he asked them why. And they, oh, you were serious. Yes. And so from then on, they always scheduled what we call a turnaround during the afternoons during the work week, if at all possible. Sometimes you don't, but that was the plan. So what was the benefits? Well, that afternoon energy was more expensive. Just by doing that, we reduced our energy bill 10%. That's a lot of money because we spent a lot of money on energy. But there were more benefits. Remember, I said that when you eliminate waste and you're sustainable, that's improving your quality, and higher quality is always cheaper. Well, the most experienced workers work what shift? Day shift. And these people can turn the equipment around a lot faster than the people on the back shifts or the weekend shifts. Those are less experienced people. And so our uptime in the factory went up because the equipment was down for less time. And uptime is a huge metric that the production manager looks at. Also, some of this equipment is old and cranky, and it doesn't like being turned off and on. And so frequently we would have to bring an engineer in, and she'd have to start the piece of equipment back up for us. We'd take a programming adjustment or something like that, some troubleshooting. Well, if you're doing it at night or on weekends, you just ruined her weekend. And so the engineers were really excited because we were doing these during the day. If they were needed, they just walked from their office where they were at anyways. The other thing is when we learned how to do this, we could now join what is called a demand response program, where the utility would ask us, could you turn your power off tomorrow afternoon? We're predicting really high temperatures and we're not going to have enough electricity on the grid. And they would pay you to turn off. Well, not only did we have routine shutdowns we did for manufacturing, we also had to do shutdowns to do major equipment modifications and repairs. And we just saved those up for a time when we can afford to drop a piece of equipment for a day. Well, I asked the production manager, you got to do them anyways. Could I volunteer to make those schedulable by the utility? They give us 24 hours notice, and that would be the day that we would pick one of the pieces of equipment, the big ones that need to be shut down, and we shut it down hard for him. And he said, I don't see any reason not to do that either. And so we joined the demand response program, and that saved us another couple percent on our energy bill. So, what did it cost us to do this? Nothing. We were just changing a behavior. It was very straightforward and simple once we realized we could do it. Well, don't overspecify. There's an old saying, be careful what you ask for because that is what you will get. Yeah, there's actually a story that goes with that I got from a consultant. He was working with a fast food company and he was at the corporate headquarters and they had one of their franchises who was their best performer. They were excellent. And so he thought he'd go there and see what they were doing right. So he went to this fast food outlet and he talked to the manager and said, so I hear you're the highest scoring of all of the franchises. How do you do that? And he says, it's simple. The metric is food wastage, and we don't waste any food. Well, how do you do that? We don't cook it until the customer orders it. Well, doesn't that annoy the customer? They have to wait for the food to be cooked. He said, some of them are a little upset, but most of them wait patiently and, you know, pay for the food. Well, this is a chain. They just irritated a bunch of customers. And what are they thinking? I'm not coming to this chain again. I had to wait for my food. I came here because it's fast food. So be careful what you measure because that's what you'll get. So, what are some of the principles that I've learned in this area? Focus on problems, not solutions. That's a powerful thing to catch yourself doing. I gave you an example last week. The problem with education is that teachers are underpaid. Well, that's actually a solution. We may need to pay teachers more as a solution. What is the problem? We have difficulty staffing our schools. Well, I've had friends who are teachers who quit their public school job and went to work for a private school and took the pay cut because the working conditions were better. So, yeah, maybe if we improve the working conditions, that might be a better solution than having to pay teachers more money. Focus on needs, not wants. I had a car salesman once tell me, he says, if I sell somebody what they want, they're going to talk about how they got a rotten deal. If I sell them what they need, I've got a customer who will tell other people what a great sales guy I am. Because he has to interview them to find out what the needs really are. Yeah, well, you may really want that fancy red sports car, but you have children coming. Maybe you want something with a back seat so you can put a car seat in there. Have you thought of that? And he would work with them on their needs. And they would leave much happier because it's hard sometimes to figure out what you really need. And it's nice to have some help. Choose performance over features. You can say, we want you to use compact fluorescent light bulbs because they're more energy efficient. In fact, people have done that. However, they didn't specify a performance. Was that the best solution? No one liked them, and they currently don't sell very often. Today, we use LED lights, which have never been specified by anyone that you had to buy them. Why? Because they're so much better. Choose performance, not features. And don't be afraid to encourage your suppliers to make suggestions. I did a major contract, and we had to pick the general contractor to build the factory before we had any drawings done. And we were going to have them participate in that. So we interviewed them about who they were and how they approach problems, who they were going to be staffing with, what were their approaches. And one of them says, oh, we're going to do full 3D modeling of everything that you put in the factory. And I asked, really? How much more does that cost to do? And they said, very confused, more. We do it because it's cheaper. They understood higher quality is cheaper. So who do you think we picked for that project? Well, I'll give you some more examples next week. Hope to see you then. Until then, be good steward of God's world.